The sound of tearing metal filled the air as the ship screamed toward the icy surface below. Captain Grant gripped the armrests, swearing under his breath. His knuckles turned white from the pressure. He could hear alarms blaring over the intercom, signaling their imminent doom. "This is it," Grant muttered, tightening his seatbelt. He'd seen enough to know there was no escape from a crash like this. The ship buckled as it struck the icy moon's surface, tearing apart. Everything went black. Grant awoke to the sound of wind howling. His head ached, but the freezing cold bit into him like 1,000 tiny daggers. He groaned and pushed himself upright, his breath visible in the frigid air. The ship was wrecked, smoking in the distance, and the cold stretched out in every direction. He wasn't dead. That was something. Yet. Struggling to his feet, Grant scanned the horizon. His team, gone. The ship, obliterated. And the worst part? He was stuck on this frozen Hell's Cape with no backup, no supplies, and no way to reach home. He took a deep breath and moved toward the wreckage. Maybe there'd be something useful in the debris, anything to help him survive this. As he approached the wreckage, a low hum caught his attention. Looking up, Grant spotted a massive, hulking figure looming over the wreck. The creature stood nearly 7 feet tall, its silhouette defined against the moon's pale, cold light. Its armor glinted like polished obsidian. The figure's red eyes narrowed as it spotted him. Grant stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the pistol at his side. His mind raced. What the hell was this? Some kind of alien warrior? The creature's voice, deep and rumbling, cut through the icy air. "Human! You are mine now!" Grant blinked, confused. Mine? This wasn't the typical "I've got you now" alien trope he was used to. There was something oddly smug about the warrior's tone. As if it owned the very air around it. "What the hell do you want, big guy?" Grant's voice was thick with irritation and fear, but he refused to show weakness. He wasn't just going to roll over for some giant alien. The warrior's helmet slid open to reveal its face, if you could call it that. A complex array of sharp, chitinous plates covered its features. Its mouth, if it could be called that, barely moved as it spoke. "You will share my bed, or freeze to death." Grant's brow furrowed, and for a split second, his brain failed to register the absurdity of the statement. "Wait, what?" He blinked hard, trying to wrap his head around what had just been said. The alien's expression didn't shift an inch. It was either incredibly serious or completely ignorant of how ridiculous its demand sounded. "You heard me." The alien's voice had a deep, confident ring to it. "If you want to survive the night, you must share warmth. My bed will provide shelter. Or you will freeze." Grant let out a sharp laugh, his gaze flicking from the creature to the vast, frozen wasteland around them. "Let me get this straight. You're telling me that I have to share your bed with you? That's your brilliant survival plan?" The alien didn't laugh. It didn't seem to understand humor at all. "Yes." Grant took a step back, laughing harder now, though it was tinged with disbelief. "And what? You think I'm just going to roll over and take that order from you? Because last time I checked, we weren't in some bizarre alien sex cult." The alien tilted its head, eyes narrowing in confusion. Grant's attempt at humor clearly flew over its head. "Sex cult?" the warrior repeated, as if it were learning a new language. "No, human. This is a matter of survival. If you do not comply, you will die. I will not allow that." Grant took a deep breath, resisting the urge to punch the alien. There was something unsettling about its calm demeanor. The warrior seemed so matter-of-fact, so confident in the absurdity of the situation. As if its logic made perfect sense in its own alien way. "Oh, right. I'll just cuddle you, and we'll both magically survive," Grant scoffed. "What's next? You gonna tell me I have to call you daddy to really seal the deal?" The alien's expression remained blank. "What is daddy?" Grant's jaw nearly hit the ground. "You're telling me you don't even know what a daddy kink is?" He stared at the alien like it was some kind of primitive, uneducated creature. "Where the hell did you come from?" The warrior didn't answer directly. Instead, It slowly turned its back to him, walking toward the shelter it had set up. Grant had no choice but to follow. At this point, the alien wasn't even giving him a chance to argue. It felt strangely manipulative. It wasn't just the directness of the demand, it was the underlying arrogance. As if the warrior was sure Grant would cave to its power. Grant stood his ground for a few moments before following, rolling his eyes. This is so fucked up. They reached the shelter, a half-frozen structure built from some kind of alien material that Grant had never seen before. It was definitely more substantial than anything his ship's wreckage could offer, so he grudgingly admitted it might be their best shot at surviving the night. But when Grant stepped inside and saw the elaborate bedding set up in the corner, his stomach churned. It wasn't even a traditional sleeping bag arrangement. It looked like a luxurious nest, big enough for two, if not more. No way was he getting anywhere near that. No, Grant said, his voice firm. That's your side of the bed, and I'll just make do with the cold, thanks. Thraxer looked at him, almost puzzled. It is not an option, human. The warmth will not survive if we do not share. You will die. I will not let you die. Grant felt a flicker of something in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was pity, annoyance, or just plain survival instinct, but he refused to give in to the warrior's demands, not without a fight. You really don't get it, do you? No way I'm sharing that nest with you. Thraxer stepped closer, towering over Grant. You misunderstand. It is not a request. It is a command. Grant met the alien's gaze, his own stubbornness flaring. Yeah, well, you can command me all you want, but this isn't happening. They locked eyes, and for a brief moment, the air between them crackled with tension. The alien was stronger, taller, and probably more capable of surviving the elements. But Grant? He wasn't about to let some overconfident alien get the best of him. Not without a fight. Grant huddled against the cold wall of the shelter, his breath forming a cloud of mist in front of him. The alien had already claimed the nest as its own, laying down with an air of smug superiority. It didn't even seem bothered by the freezing temperatures, while Grant was shivering uncontrollably. The alien, Thraxer, seemed unfazed, his body temperature probably far better suited to this kind of environment. Grant cursed under his breath, rubbing his arms to generate some warmth. It was absurd. The entire situation was absurd. A damn alien warrior was demanding he share a bed, or, in this case, an oversized nest. It wasn't even bedding. The thing looked like it was designed for some kind of royal alien orgy. Come on, you really think this is gonna work? Grant muttered to himself, shifting around in the cold. He wasn't giving in. No matter how much his teeth chattered, there was no way he was gonna share a bed with this arrogant piece of intergalactic muscle. Thraxer, sprawled out like he owned the entire frozen planet, glanced over his shoulder. His red eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. You are freezing. I can hear your teeth. Share the warmth, human. Grant clenched his jaw to stop the rattling. He refused to make this easy. Yeah, no. I'm not sharing anything with you. This isn't some kind of sleepover. The alien's expression didn't change. It was as though Grant's protests were just background noise. You misunderstand, human. I do not offer this as a favor. It is an order. Grant rolled his eyes. The alien didn't seem to get it. He wasn't some soldier under command, waiting for orders to be barked at him. He was a military officer, used to making the decisions, used to giving the orders. This wasn't a chain of command, this was stupid. I'm not your subordinate, buddy. You can go freeze for all I care. I'll take my chances out here. Thraxer's massive frame shifted, and the warrior sat up slowly, eyes never leaving Grant. You misunderstand. It is not your choice. You will share warmth, or you will die. Your choice is only whether it happens quickly or slowly. Grant met the alien's gaze, narrowing his eyes. You know, I'm getting real tired of your threats. You keep talking about survival, but you're not exactly Mr. Helpful here. What, you think just because you're big and tough, you can order me around? The alien remained unperturbed. You are weak. Your kind is soft, brittle. Your body cannot handle this cold without assistance. Grant snorted, trying not to feel a stab of discomfort. Yeah, well, I've got news for you. I'm not the one in a weird, oversized sleeping bag trying to look comfortable. So spare me the weak human speech. Thraxer didn't respond immediately. The warrior's silence was almost more unnerving than anything he could have said. For a long moment, the two of them just sat there, the cold pressing in like a wall. Grant's teeth chattered harder. The alien's deep voice cut through the silence. You will not survive the night if you do not share warmth. Grant turned his head, looking out the small, fractured window in the shelter. The storm outside raged, winds howling like a living thing. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and even with the shelter, it was clear the cold wasn't something you just toughed out. His military training told him to adapt. Survival came first. But the idea of curling up with this alien, who, from what he could tell, was probably about as warm as a walking furnace, made him sick to his stomach. He scoffed. I'd rather freeze than get that close to you. Thraxer stood, towering above him. The alien's chest heaved as though the idea of being denied something was almost foreign to him. He loomed closer, his eyes narrowing as he regarded Grant. You will not survive this night without my help. Grant was getting frustrated now, even more so because, deep down, he knew Thraxer wasn't wrong. The cold was gnawing at him. His body was starting to stiffen from the biting temperatures. Every breath he took felt like it could be his last. Still, he couldn't back down. Not to this giant, not to this ridiculous ultimatum. I'll take my chances, thanks. Grant spat, shivering violently. The alien's response was swift. He reached down with one powerful hand, gripping Grant's shoulder with an ironclad grasp. Grant flinched, but the warrior wasn't trying to hurt him. He was simply picking him up, easily lifting him off the ground. The sudden movement made Grant's heart race. Hey, what the hell? Grant's words were cut off when Thraxer gently placed him down beside the nest. I said you will share warmth, or you will die. Your resistance is irrelevant. Thraxer's voice was more matter-of-fact than it was cold. It was as if he couldn't comprehend why a human would resist the one thing that could save them both. Grant stood up, his arms crossed over his chest in an act of defiance. He wasn't giving in. Not to this. Not to anything this alien warrior had to offer. Thraxer knelt beside the nest, his eyes flicking up to Grant with an air of impatience. I will not argue with you. The temperature is below your survival threshold. You will freeze if you do not comply. Grant clenched his jaw, his heart pounding. He knew the alien was right. It was too cold. His body was already on the edge of hypothermia, and the last thing he needed was to let his pride get the better of him. His brain was racing. He wasn't an idiot. But the stubborn part of him refused to show weakness. And then there was the issue of that damn bed. The nest. Thraxer was as serious as he had ever been about it, and Grant couldn't deny the logic behind it. The cold was becoming unbearable, and he was no longer sure how long he could hold out. His military instincts told him to survive. To adapt. But hell if he was going to admit that to Thraxer. As the storm outside raged louder, a thought nagged at Grant. He didn't have a choice. The alien was right. He needed warmth. He needed to survive. Fine. Grant finally muttered through gritted teeth. But no funny business. Just warmth. Thraxer's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Grant saw a flicker of what could almost be described as understanding, a recognition that this was more than just survival. It was a compromise. For both of them. You have my word, the alien said, his voice low. And so, despite every ounce of resistance inside him, Grant sat down beside Thraxer. The cold outside howled even louder, but now, in the presence of his unlikely companion, he allowed himself the smallest flicker of relief. The warmth from the alien warrior's body was undeniable. It wasn't immediate, but as Grant begrudgingly settled beside Thraxer, the temperature around them began to rise. Slowly. Uncomfortably slowly. The cold had seeped deep into his bones, and it was a battle just to relax enough to let his body absorb the heat. Grant sat stiffly, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as if the mere act of sharing warmth was an act of betrayal. Thraxer, on the other hand, had made himself comfortable in a way that only a being who was used to being in control could. The alien sat in an almost regal posture, not fazed in the slightest by the awkwardness of the situation. Grant could feel the creature's gaze, intense and unwavering, though the alien didn't say a word. They just sat there in silence, the tension in the air thicker than the blizzards howling outside. It felt as if everything had slowed down, except for Grant's rapidly increasing discomfort. "Well, this is cozy," Grant muttered under his breath, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Next time, I'll make sure to pack my own alien heat source." Thraxer didn't react, his eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the shelter. His focus was entirely outside, as if Grant's sarcasm was as inconsequential as the wind howling in the distance. "Your attempts at humor are odd," he said, his voice more curious than offended. Grant snorted, shifting uncomfortably. "Yeah, well, you'd be surprised what a guy has to say to stay sane in this kind of situation." For a few moments, the silence settled again. Grant glanced over at Thraxer, whose eyes were still glued to the outside. He had no idea what the alien was thinking. No clue if it even had a proper thought process, like humans did. Was it really so calm because it was used to ruling over lesser beings? Or was it just that Thraxer didn't know how to deal with being stuck in the middle of nowhere with a human? Grant had to admit, a small part of him was getting frustrated. Not just by the bed-sharing arrangement. No, it was more than that. It was the alien's sheer indifference. Its assumption that he would just bend to whatever was asked of him. That thought made his blood boil. "I'm not your pet, Thraxer. You can stop acting like I'm some weakling who needs your help to survive," Grant said, glaring at the alien. Thraxer turned his head slowly, his gaze sharp and unblinking. "You are weak. Your kind is not built for cold. You are soft, fragile. It is not an insult. It is a statement of fact." Grant gritted his teeth. "Yeah? Well, I've survived in worse conditions than this, so I don't need you telling me what I can and can't do." The alien's voice remained as even and calm as ever. "Then why do you not leave? If you are so capable, why do you sit beside me?" Grant's mind raced for a clever response, but the truth was, the cold was starting to make him second-guess his stubbornness. He wasn't used to feeling this vulnerable, this exposed. He was a soldier. A survivor. And yet here he was, practically begging for warmth from an alien. He clenched his fists. "I'm not sitting here because I need your warmth. I'm just biding my time. Waiting for an opening." Thraxer gave a single, slow nod. "You are waiting for escape. It will not come. The storm outside is endless. You are trapped here with me. The cold will kill you long before your escape arrives." Grant's jaw tightened. He didn't need to hear that. He didn't need the alien's cold, unfeeling logic to remind him how hopeless the situation was. His mind screamed at him to fight back, to do something, but the truth was undeniable. They were stuck. And if he didn't take this seriously, if he didn't make it work with Thraxer, he might not make it out of here alive. "So what, now you're playing the hero?" Grant's voice was tight, a little too bitter for his liking. "I still don't get what you think you're gonna get out of this. A grateful human? Is that your prize?" Thraxer's response came with an almost unsettling amount of patience. "You misunderstand. I do not seek gratitude. I seek survival. And in this moment, survival is shared. Your existence is tied to mine. You will not survive without my assistance. And I will not survive without yours." Grant's mind whirled. There it was. The first crack in Thraxer's thick armor. The alien wasn't all-powerful, after all. Despite the bravado, despite the cold certainty in his voice, Thraxer had just admitted that they needed each other to make it out of this. That gave Grant a small, twisted sense of satisfaction. At least he wasn't the only one dependent on someone else in this godforsaken mess. A small chuckle bubbled out of him, and he immediately regretted it. "So we're like partners now?" Grant asked, raising an eyebrow. Kind of like a buddy cop movie? Human and alien, stuck on a frozen moon, bickering but saving each other's asses? Thraxer's gaze shifted slightly, his confusion evident. A movie? What is that? Grant stared at him, momentarily taken aback. You've never seen a buddy cop movie? He asked incredulously. I have seen many things, but not this movie you speak of. Is it useful? Thraxer's tone was oddly neutral, as though he were genuinely asking. Grant exhaled a frustrated laugh. Of course not. It's just, forget it. I was trying to make a joke. Apparently you don't get it either. The silence between them stretched again, thick and uncomfortable. But this time, it wasn't just cold. It was the kind of silence that followed after realizing you might not be so different after all. He had cracked a joke, and the alien hadn't reacted with hostility or confusion. It had just taken it in stride, as though it weren't a big deal. The kind of small, almost human reaction that Grant hadn't expected. The thought settled in his mind for a moment, but before he could dwell on it, Thraxer broke the silence with another observation. Your kind. You rely on humor to survive? Thraxer asked, his voice even more curious than before. Grant sighed, rubbing his forehead. It's a coping mechanism. Laughter keeps you from losing your mind when everything else falls apart. You'll figure it out eventually. Thraxer said nothing in response. But for a brief, fleeting moment, Grant felt something almost resembling understanding in the air between them. Maybe it wasn't the kind of understanding that would change anything right now. But it was something. It was more than just survival. It was cooperation, forced, uncomfortable, and still shot through with tension, but it was there. Grant leaned back, letting himself relax a fraction. He wasn't going to fully trust Thraxer. Not yet. But as the warmth from the alien's body pressed against him, slowly loosening the tension in his muscles, he had to admit that maybe, just maybe, they were going to survive this together. Or at least, that was the plan. And sometimes, the plan was all you had. The shelter was quiet, save for the occasional whistle of the wind outside and the low hum of the emergency power systems. Grant was trying to focus on keeping himself warm, but his mind kept wandering back to the alien sitting next to him. Thraxer, for all his arrogance, had proven to be surprisingly tolerable, in a way. That wasn't to say Grant liked him. Hell no. But there was something undeniably pragmatic about the alien's approach to survival. Thraxer wasn't here to make friends. He was here to make it out alive, just like Grant. The problem was that Grant wasn't sure if he could trust Thraxer. Not completely. Not yet. Despite the alien's insistence on the teamwork bit, there was still that uncomfortable feeling in the back of his mind, the feeling that, if given half the chance, Thraxer would throw him under the bus. Or worse, off the side of a cliff. It was hard to trust a creature that thought of humans as weak, inferior things. Grant shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position. The nest, if you could call it that, was too large and too soft, and not nearly warm enough. Thraxer, on the other hand, seemed to have no problem with it. The alien sprawled out like a giant, lounging predator, content in his natural habitat, as if they weren't sitting on the brink of death. As if everything was perfectly normal. So, what now? Grant asked, his voice breaking the silence. You plan on just sitting here all night? Waiting for the storm to blow over? Thraxer's red eyes flicked over to him, a faint glimmer of recognition in his gaze. Yes. It is the only logical choice. The storm is too strong for any attempts at escape. We must wait until it passes. Grant snorted. Great. Just wait it out. Hope for the best. You know, I've had better plans in my time. Like when I didn't get stuck on a frozen Hell's Cape with an alien who thinks he's better than me. Thraxer didn't flinch at the jab. You are frustrated. You think? Grant shot back, rubbing his arms. I've got about a dozen things to be pissed about right now. We're stuck cold, and I've got no idea how to get us off this rock. And I've got you to thank for that little gem of a situation. Thraxer's head tilted slightly. I did not crash the ship. Grant gritted his teeth. No, but you sure as hell didn't help when we were crashing, did you? The alien didn't respond to that. Instead, he leaned back slightly, folding his arms across his chest. It was a strangely casual gesture, like he wasn't in any danger. Like they were just two guys, having a chat over beers, and not literally freezing to death on an alien world. Grant huffed. You really think you're the only one who knows how to survive out here? I've survived worse than this. I've been in situations where the odds were stacked higher than this, and I still made it out. The alien's voice was steady, calm. And yet here you are, cold and vulnerable. If you were truly capable, you would have already found a solution. Grant bit his tongue. He hated it when people, or aliens, made sense in such a blunt, unhelpful way. But damn it, Thraxer had a point. No matter how much he hated to admit it, Grant wasn't exactly in the driver's seat here. The alien had the advantage in almost every way, from his physiology to his knowledge of the planet. The human soldier was out of his element. The silence stretched between them again. Grant stared at the dim light flickering overhead, his mind racing. There had to be a way out of this. There always was. Grant didn't just give up. He didn't let things spiral out of control. Not without a fight. So, what now? What was the next move? Thraxer broke the silence again. Your pride will be the death of you. Grant looked up sharply, his brow furrowed. Excuse me? You are stubborn. Thraxer continued, his voice still that calm, detached tone. You would rather die than admit you need help. This weakness is why your kind struggles in situations like this. Grant clenched his fists, his pulse quickening. I'm not weak. I don't need you to tell me that. The alien didn't flinch. You need warmth. You need survival. You will need to compromise to survive. Even if it means submitting to someone stronger. Grant's breath quickened. I'm not some pathetic little lapdog that just bows to whoever's bigger. You think I need to submit to you? You really think that's the answer? Thraxer's gaze softened, the alien's voice a little lower. It is not submission. It is cooperation. You are not weak if you accept help. Your pride will not keep you alive. Grant stared at him for a moment, the words sinking in deeper than he wanted to admit. The alien had a point. A painful one. His pride had nearly cost him his life on more than one occasion. This time, it was only luck that had kept him alive long enough to even argue about it. But the idea of surrendering to this thing, of giving up any semblance of control, was a bitter pill to swallow. And what about you? Grant finally asked, his voice sharper than he intended. How do I know you're not just playing me, trying to get me to warm your ass while you sit there all high and mighty? Thraxer's expression remained unreadable. I do not lie, human. And if you do not trust me, you will freeze to death. It is that simple. Grant's eyes flicked to the door, then back to Thraxer. The storm raged outside, the sound of the wind like 100 screams in the night. He wasn't getting out of here on his own. Not in this weather. Not without help. He had been so fixated on doing things on his own, on controlling the situation, that he had lost sight of the reality. The reality was, he was stuck here. He had no choice but to rely on the one thing he hated the most. The alien? With a long sigh, Grant leaned back, the tension starting to ease out of his shoulders. He couldn't keep this up. Not with the cold seeping deeper into his bones, gnawing at his very soul. It was either cooperate or freeze. Fine, Grant muttered under his breath. But if I freeze to death in your stupid nest, I'm blaming you. Thraxer didn't respond immediately, but Grant could feel the slight shift in the air between them. The alien was as still as ever, but something in the tension had shifted. It wasn't victory for either side, just a grudging acceptance of the reality that, for now, they had to make it work. And just like that, despite every ounce of pride and defiance he had left, Grant had to admit it, survival came first. Everything else was secondary. The cold was starting to gnaw at the edges of Grant's resolve. Despite his initial resistance, despite the constant, simmering frustration he felt toward Thraxer, the reality of the situation was unmistakable. The alien's warmth, though begrudgingly accepted, was slowly making the difference between life and death. He could feel it now, the faintest pulse of heat seeping through his frozen limbs, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. You know, Grant began, his voice hoarse from the dry air. If you're so used to commanding lesser beings, how come you've never been in a real battle? I mean, you can't really think this whole let's sit in a cave and wait for it to blow over plan is gonna work, right? Thraxor shifted beside him, unbothered by the accusation. I have led my warriors into many battles. You do not understand what it means to command. You rely too much on brute force. Grant shot him a sideways glance, fighting back a snort of disbelief. Brute force? You think I just rush into things? Thraxor's red eyes turned to meet Grant's, piercing and calculating. Yes, human. You are rash, reckless, impulsive. These are the hallmarks of your kind. Grant's chest tightened. It wasn't the first time someone had said that to him, but hearing it from an alien made the words feel like barbed wire being twisted around his ribs. He opened his mouth, but the words stuck in his throat. Rash? Maybe. Reckless? Certainly. He wasn't exactly known for his careful planning. But impulsive? Maybe, but that was a choice he made for survival. Always had. Fine, maybe I'm not your ideal soldier, Grant muttered under his breath. But I get the job done. Unlike some people. Thraxor didn't respond, but Grant could feel the alien's gaze lingering on him. There was a weight in the air now, something different. Something that hadn't been there before. I've never been a fan of sitting around and waiting to die, Grant said, his voice tight. If I wanted to sit here and freeze, I'd have done it alone. But now I've got you on my back, so I guess that means I've got to deal with your stupid attitude while I try to survive, huh? Thraxor's gaze softened, but the alien didn't flinch. It is not my attitude that will kill you. It is your failure to adapt. Grant laughed, a short, bitter sound. I'm adapting just fine, thanks. I'm not the one who's in danger of dying out here. Thraxor didn't reply. His eyes had gone distant, like he was lost in thought. The silence grew, and for a brief moment, Grant felt something, unsettling shift in the air. It wasn't just that he was uncomfortable. It was that Thraxor had said something that had made him stop and think. Really think. Survival isn't about brute strength, is it? Grant finally said, looking up at the ceiling, trying to break the silence. It's about adaptability. You've got that right in a way. But I'm not sure you get it. I mean, we're still here, right? Still breathing. But we're not getting out of this by just sitting here and hoping the storm lets up. At least I don't think we are. Thraxor's eyes flicked over to him, and for a moment, there was a glimmer of recognition in the alien's gaze. You are not wrong. But survival is also about knowing when to wait. Grant groaned, throwing his head back in exasperation. Waiting again. Jesus Christ, are you always this patient? Thraxor gave a slight nod. Patience is a virtue. In battle, you wait for your enemy to reveal their weakness. In this situation, we wait for the storm to weaken before we act. Grant wasn't sure if it was frustration or something else, but he couldn't help it. He let out an exaggerated sigh. Patience, huh? That's rich, coming from a guy who practically told me to submit earlier. Thraxor's head tilted, an almost imperceptible shift, as if processing the words. You misunderstood. I did not suggest submission. I suggested cooperation. That is the key to survival. Cooperation. Grant said the word with a bit of venom. You know what I think? I think you're still trying to pull the whole I'm the boss, you're the weakling routine. You can't even stop calling me weak. Thraxor's voice lowered, measured. You are weak in the sense that you are human. Your body is not built for this environment. You are fragile in ways that my people are not. But I do not call you weak in spirit. Grant stopped, blinking at the alien. You think I'm weak in spirit? Thraxor met his gaze squarely. Yes. You rely too much on pride, on fighting. You are not like your kind's true warriors. You do not understand the strength that comes from not needing to prove yourself. Grant's teeth clenched. Maybe that's where you're wrong. I do understand strength. I know what it means to fight for survival. I know what it means to push through hell and come out the other side. I just don't need to do it your way." There was a long, pregnant pause. For a moment, Grant thought Thraxer would retaliate, shoot back with one of his usual, patronizing lines. But the alien just sat there, unmoving, staring at the floor as if considering something. "I will admit," Thraxer said quietly, his voice strangely softer than before, "that your spirit is formidable. You do not give up easily. It is a quality I have not seen often in your kind." Grant opened his mouth, about to say something sarcastic, but stopped. For the first time since they'd been stuck here, he felt a faint shift in the dynamic between them. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even respect, not really. But there was a change. Something subtle, but it was there. The silence stretched on, thick and tense, but it wasn't as oppressive anymore. Maybe they didn't like each other. Maybe they still saw each other as enemies. But, for the first time, there was a thread of understanding between them. Just a thread. And sometimes, in a situation like this, that was enough. Grant glanced at Thraxer, who was still staring out into the storm, unmoved by the cold or the chaos outside. Maybe the alien had the right idea. Maybe they both just needed to stop fighting for once. It wasn't perfect. Hell, it wasn't even close. But in that moment, it was enough to just survive. The night dragged on like a slow-moving river, freezing at the edges but relentless in its current. Grant had no idea how much time had passed, but it didn't matter. The cold was a constant, gnawing presence, and the lack of real options left his mind wandering in strange directions. He couldn't help but wonder if Thraxer ever had any doubts. If the alien, for just a moment, felt the same kind of desperation Grant did. But then again, why would he? Thraxer was made for this. He thrived in hostile environments, in situations like this. Maybe that's why the alien didn't seem bothered by their circumstances. But Grant wasn't Thraxer, and that meant he wasn't built to sit idly by while the storm raged outside. So, after what felt like hours of silence, he decided to break it, to do something, anything, to snap them both out of the stagnant lull. "You know," Grant began, keeping his voice steady despite the growing tension in his chest. "I've been thinking." Thraxer turned his head slightly, acknowledging him without actually looking at him. "Thinking about what?" Grant grinned, the action feeling almost foreign after all the tension that had built up between them. "About how much this situation sucks. How cold we are, how we're stuck here, and how this whole cooperation thing could maybe use a little more work." Thraxer's brow furrowed slightly, but he remained quiet. Grant pushed forward. "You know, the thing that really gets to me? I'm supposed to be the human in this partnership, right? But you've got all these superior survival skills, all this strength and alien wisdom, and yet here we are. Stuck." Thraxer's voice was even, though a hint of irritation lingered underneath. "You speak as though you expected to be able to control this situation. I didn't expect it. I just thought I could do better than this. And now, we're both stuck in the same hole, and we're supposed to be working together to get out. But all you've done so far is sit back and tell me how weak I am." Grant's words hung in the air for a moment, heavier than the cold around them. He felt the alien's gaze turn toward him, the weight of that red-eyed stare pressing into him like a 1,000-pound stone. "You think I've done nothing?" Thraxer's voice was low, dangerous. "You think I've been sitting back, taking advantage of you? You do not see the efforts I have made to ensure your survival." Grant stared at him, his heart pounding. "Efforts? What, like the time you told me to submit and let you control everything?" Thraxer's expression shifted, the tension in his face faltering for just a moment. "I do not control you. I am simply suggesting that cooperation is necessary." Grant's chuckle was dry, bordering on bitter. "Cooperation, huh? Maybe. But maybe I'm tired of being told what to do. Maybe I'm tired of being told that I'm weak, that I don't measure up to whatever expectations you have for me." Thraxer was quiet, but there was something about the silence now, something different. It wasn't just cold. It wasn't just tension. It was as though the alien had, reconsidered. Something in his posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough for Grant to notice. "You are not weak," Thraxer said after a beat. "I have seen strength in you. The strength of stubbornness." Grant blinked, momentarily stunned. "Wait, what?" Thraxer turned toward him fully now, his voice softening just a bit. "You do not give up easily. You have faced impossible odds and still kept fighting. That is strength. Not your muscles, not your survival skills, but your refusal to submit. Your strength is in your resilience. It is your kind's greatest weapon." Grant didn't know what to say. It wasn't often that someone, or something, gave him that kind of credit. And it certainly wasn't common for Thraxer to do it. He couldn't help the warmth that spread through his chest, a mix of pride and something else he wasn't quite ready to face. You actually think that?" Grant asked, his voice a little hoarse, betraying more of his emotions than he wanted. Thraxer gave a slight nod. "I do." For a long moment, the two of them just sat there, processing the unexpected turn in their conversation. The alien had, in his own way, admitted a kind of respect. It was small. It was fleeting. But it was real. And as much as Grant wanted to laugh it off, he couldn't. It felt important. Still, the human side of him wasn't quite ready to let go of the anger and frustration that had been bubbling under the surface for so long. "Well, that's all well and good, but you do realize I'm still freezing my ass off, right?" Thraxer's lips twitched upward, a barely perceptible smirk. "You are still cold." Grant shot him a look. "Gee, thanks for the observation. Do you have anything useful to add, or are we just going to sit here and talk about our feelings all night?" Thraxer's expression softened a little, and the alien finally shifted closer. "There is another way to stay warm." Grant felt his heart skip a beat, though he would never admit it. "Oh? And what's that?" Thraxer gave him a flat look, his voice dripping with a mix of dry humor and something else. "You know exactly what I mean." Grant's eyes widened as the meaning sank in, and his pulse quickened. For a moment, he stared at the alien, unsure how to respond. His first instinct was to push back, to refuse, to make some snarky comment about how absurd the idea was. But the cold was getting to him, and Thraxer wasn't wrong. The alien's warmth had kept him alive so far, and maybe, just maybe, they were past the point of playing games. "Fine," Grant muttered, his face flushed. "But don't think I'm going to like it." Thraxer raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. Instead, he shifted closer, the temperature between them rising immediately as they found a way to share warmth. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't ideal. But in this hellish place, it was necessary. And as they lay there, huddled together in the small shelter, Grant couldn't help but think, maybe, just maybe, there was something to this partnership. Something deeper than survival, something that might eventually lead them both out of this mess. Maybe it was the start of something more than just two beings trapped together. Maybe it was the beginning of an understanding, one that neither of them could have predicted. But for now, surviving together was enough.